In an abandoned junkyard on the outskirts of the city, a 7-year-old girl was rummaging through wreckage in search of recyclable materials to help her mother survive, when muffled, desperate sounds caught her attention. Intrigued, she followed the noises to a rusty car and made an absolutely shocking discovery in the trunk. A man in an expensive suit, clearly very wealthy, was tied up with thick ropes and gagged with duct tape, his desperate eyes silently begging for help. Trembling with fear, but driven by compassion, she began trying to free him when she heard heavy footsteps quickly approaching. She panicked. What happens next is unbelievable. The afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the cemetery of steel, painting the rust in hues of orange and fire. For 7-year-old Lena, this junkyard wasn't a place of disposal, but a treasure field. Every piece of copper, every crushed aluminum can, was a small victory. A little more weight in the burlap sack that would help her mom put food on the table. Her small fingers, stained with grease and dirt, were nimble and experienced, sorting through the wreckage with a focus that belied her young age. She knew every corner of this labyrinth of car carcasses and mountains of broken appliances. It was her kingdom, a place of silence broken only by the wind whistling through shattered windows. But on this day, another sound cut through the stillness, a dull, muffled thud, coming from inside a dark, wheelless sedan, propped precariously on cinder blocks. Lena froze, her little heart leaping in her chest. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was different, heavier, followed by an indistinct murmur, like a voice trying to scream through a pillow. Curiosity, a force as powerful as hunger, pulled her closer. She moved with the caution of a feral kitten, her bare feet barely touching the dusty ground. The car looked like it had been sleeping for years, its peeling paint revealing patches of naked metal. The driver's side door was ajar, creaking in the breeze. The sound came again, this time from the trunk, a desperate, struggling sound. A part of her, the part her mother always warned about the world's dangers, screamed for her to run home. But another part, an instinctive compassion she didn't know the source of, kept her there. She circled the vehicle and stopped at the rear. With an effort that made her thin arms tremble, she forced the rusty lock. The trunk lid, heavy and reluctant, groaned open with a sharp metallic shriek, revealing the most shocking scene her young eyes had ever witnessed. Inside, squeezed into the tight space, was a man. He wore an expensive suit, now rumpled and soiled, and shoes that gleamed even in the dim light. His hands and feet were bound with thick rope, and silver duct tape covered his mouth, muffling his cries. But it was his eyes that held Lena in place. They were deep blue, wide with panic, but as they met hers, they filled with a plea so intense, so desperate, it felt like a silent prayer. The initial shock gave way to an irresistible urge to help. Without thinking, she reached out to pull at the duct tape. The man's eyes widened further, now with a spark of hope. She was about to touch the tape when a new sound, sharp and close, made her freeze. The crunch of gravel under heavy footsteps. 2 people, approaching fast. Icy panic seized her, quick as a flash. She dropped to the ground and rolled under the car, shrinking into the tight, oil-stinking space. From her hiding spot, her heart hammering against her ribs, she saw 2 pairs of dirty work boots stop beside the trunk. A deep, irritated voice cut the air. "Thought I heard something. Check and see if our package is still secure." Lena held her breath, terror closing her throat. She was trapped, inches from the men who had done this, and the fate of the man in the trunk, and now her own, hung by a terribly thin thread. Under the car, Lena's world shrank to a rectangle of dust and shadows. The smell of old oil and damp earth was suffocating, but she barely dared to breathe. The 2 pairs of boots were so close, she could see the frayed laces and the dried mud caked on the rubber. Her heart beat wildly, a frantic drum against the hard, cold ground. The man in the trunk, whom she now saw as a secret to be protected, was motionless. Through a gap, she could see a sliver of his dark suit. Every second dragged on for an hour. The deep voice, belonging to the taller, heavier man, spoke again, laced with impatience. "He's not going anywhere. Let's go. I need some coffee." The other, a wiry man, gave a humorless laugh. "Easy, Bruno." The boss was clear. "Nobody touches our golden goose. That man's fortune is worth the weight." Fortune. The word floated in the air, strange and out of place in this cemetery of forgotten things. Lena didn't understand what it meant, but she felt the weight of greed in the man's voice. Suddenly, a phone rang, an electronic chirp that shattered the tension. The wiry man, Mickey, answered, stepping a few feet away to talk. Bruno grumbled, pulled a cigarette from his pocket, and lit it, blowing a cloud of grey smoke that drifted into Lena's hiding spot, making her eyes sting. It was now or never. The distraction was her only chance. The image of the man's pleading eyes returned with full force. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but determination was stronger. She had to do something. Crawling silently on her elbows, she moved toward the back of the car, her small body unnoticed in the deep shadow. Her trembling little hand reached the edge of the open trunk. Her fingers touched the duct tape. It was rough and strong. With her heart in her throat, she found a loose corner and pulled. The sound of the tape ripping from skin sounded like thunder in her ears, but Bruno was busy with his cigarette and Mickey was still on the phone. The man in the trunk let out a pained, gasping breath, the first free sound his mouth had made. His eyes found Lena's in the gloom, a mixture of shocks, pain, and overwhelming gratitude. Lena brought a finger to her own lips in a silent plea for quiet. He understood. His voice came out in a hoarse whisper, so low she had to lean in to hear. "The knot. My hands. Pull the short end. The one facing in. Pull hard." Just then, Mickey ended his call. "Trouble. The boss wants us to move him, now." Bruno threw his cigarette to the ground and crushed it with his boot, always in a hurry. "Come on." "Shut it." Panic seized Lena again. With the speed that fear gave her, she scrambled back under the car, her heart nearly bursting from her chest. The trunk lid slammed shut with a metallic boom that echoed through the junkyard, plunging the man back into total darkness. The two men walked to the front of the car, and Lena heard the jingle of keys and the click of a door being unlocked. They were going to take the car, they were going to take the man, and she, a 7-year-old girl hidden under a heap of metal, now carried the only key to his freedom, whispered in a moment of desperate courage. The old car's engine coughed, sputtered, and with a frightening roar, came to life. The ground beneath Lena shook violently, and a cloud of hot, acrid exhaust enveloped her, making her cough silently, her face pressed against her arm. The vehicle lurched forward, and she grabbed onto a rusty axle with all the strength her small arms possessed. The world outside became a blur of dirt and weeds rushing past, inches from her face. Every pothole in the dirt road was torture, jarring her so hard her teeth chattered. The noise was deafening, the groaning engine, rocks pinging against the car's underbelly, and the constant shriek of old metal. But above it all, the men's voices leaked into her moving prison. "The boss said the new warehouse is more secure," Mickey said. "Nobody's going to look for a multimillionaire in the middle of an industrial wasteland." Bruno, the driver, grunted. He thinks he's so smart, thinks his money can buy him anything. But it won't buy his freedom until he signs those papers. The company's entire assets will change hands, and we'll get our cut. Lena didn't understand about companies or assets, but she understood greed. It was the same ugliness she saw in some people's eyes when her mom counted her coins at the end of the day. The man in the trunk wasn't just a man. He was a prize, a valuable object these men wanted to own. His phrase echoed in her mind, an anchor in the storm of fear and noise. "Pull the short end." She repeated the words to herself, a secret mantra. It was her mission. It was why she was here, trembling and clinging to life under a moving car. It was no longer just curiosity or compassion. It was a silent promise she had made to those desperate eyes. The drive felt like an eternity. The smell of gasoline and exhaust made her nauseous, and the dust kicked up from the road scratched her throat. She thought of her mom, who would be worried sick by now. A wave of guilt washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by the image of the bound man. Her mom had taught her to be good, to help those in need. And this man needed help more than anyone she had ever met. Finally, the car slowed. The sound of the wheels changed from dirt to cracked asphalt, then to the smooth concrete of a floor. The engine noise echoed, amplified, and she knew they were indoors. The car stopped abruptly and the engine was cut. The ensuing silence was almost as frightening as the noise. The doors creaked open and the men's boots hit the concrete floor. "Let's get him out. The boss will be here in an hour for the final talk." Lena heard the click of the trunk being unlocked. The lid opened with a groan. There was the sound of a body being unceremoniously dragged out. She squeezed to the side, risking a peek from under the chassis. She saw the man's expensive shoes being dragged across the filthy floor. She saw his hands bound behind his back, the knot exactly as he'd described. The opportunity was right there, just feet away. But it was an impassable chasm. As they dragged him, the man's body twisted. Something small and metallic slipped from his pocket, falling to the ground with a nearly inaudible clink. The object rolled across the concrete, losing speed until it came to a stop just inches from Lena's face. It was a key, not a car key, but a small, ornate key, the likes of which she had never seen before. She stared at it, her heart thumping. It was a piece of him. A clue, maybe even a hope, but to grab it, she would have to move, risking a sound that would give her away and seal her fate forever. The sound of the men's boots and the dragged body echoed through the vast warehouse space, growing more distant with each second. Lena remained motionless under the car, her breath caught in her throat, her eyes fixed on the small, golden key that gleamed faintly in the dim light of a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was such a small object, yet it seemed to hold an immense weight. It was a connection, a responsibility. She knew, with a child's absolute certainty, that she had to get it. When the sounds faded to a distant murmur, followed by the clang of a metal door, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The silence returned, thick and oppressive. The warehouse smelled of dust, dampness, and something cold and metallic. With the care of a wild animal emerging from its den, she crawled out from her hiding place. The weak light revealed a huge, cavernous space filled with stacked wooden crates and old machinery covered in grey tarps. The car she had hidden under seemed small and insignificant in the vastness. Her eyes went straight to the key. She picked it up, the cool metal a shock against her warm, dirty skin. It was heavier than it looked. On one side, a crest was etched into it, a lion wearing a crown. She closed her hand around it, feeling the outline of the lion in her palm. It was a secret that now belonged to her. Fear began to give way to a new feeling. Determination. She couldn't just run, not after all this. The man's voice, his desperate whisper, and the image of his pleading eyes were seared into her mind. Pull the short end. She knew what she had to do. Moving in the shadows, sticking close to the stacks of crates, she followed in the direction the men had taken their prisoner. Her bare feet made no sound on the concrete floor. Every creak of the metal roof in the wind made her freeze, her heart leaping into her throat. She found the metal door. There was a small, wire mesh window at her eye level if she stood on her tiptoes. Very carefully, she raised herself up, peering inside. The room was a small office, as grimy and neglected as the rest of the warehouse. There was a metal desk, 2 chairs, and tied to one of them was the man. His eyes were open, staring at a blank spot on the peeling wall. He looked exhausted, the hope she'd seen in his eyes at the junkyard now completely extinguished. There was no sign of the kidnappers. This was the moment, but the door was closed. Lena looked at the knob, then at the key in her hand. No, this key was too small. It wouldn't fit. She scanned the door, searching for a crack, an opening. There was a small gap at the bottom, just wide enough for her fingers to slip through, but how to open it from the inside? Her gaze swept the room, desperate, until it landed on a detail. Hanging from a nail beside the door, on the inside, was a ring of rusty keys. One of them might fit. The idea that popped into her head was so audacious, so unlikely, it scared her, but it was the only one she had. She knelt, her face against the cold metal of the door, and whispered as loudly as she dared, "Mister?" The man inside flinched. His head turned slowly toward the door. His eyes widened in disbelief when he saw hers peeking through the gap at the bottom. The girl. How? The keys, she whispered back, her voice a trembling thread. Hanging on the wall. Can you reach them? He looked at the ring of keys, then at his hands, still tied tightly behind the chair. He shook his head, a gesture of defeat. Impossible. The ropes are too tight. Lena felt a knot of despair forming. They were so close. She couldn't give up. Try, please, try. Spurred by the urgency in her voice, he began to struggle in the chair. He leaned, rocking his body, the metal chair scraping noisily on the floor. The sound was a danger, an invitation for the kidnappers to return. He stretched his bound fingers, groaning with effort, the chair creaking under the strain. For a moment, it looked like he would make it. His fingertips brushed against the cold metal of the keys. But then, from the other side of the warehouse, the large sliding door began to open with a deafening metal screech, spilling a beam of light from the headlights of an arriving car. The boss was here, and they had just run out of time. The shriek of the warehouse door was like a fire alarm in Lena's soul. Sharp, paralyzing panic sent her stumbling back from the office door, and she fell in a heap on the dusty floor. The headlights of the entering car swept across the warehouse interior, turning shadows into dancing monsters for a split second. She scrambled behind a pile of old tires, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would tear through her chest. The small golden key was still in her hand, and she clutched it so tightly the edges of the lion dug into her palm. The car, a dark, expensive SUV, pulled up next to the old sedan. The driver's door opened, and a man in polished shoes and well-tailored trousers stepped out. He wasn't big like Bruno, or wiry like Mickey. He carried an imposing presence, a cold calm that felt more threatening than any muscle. The office door opened, and Bruno and Mickey came out to greet the newcomer. "Boss," Bruno said, his voice submissive. "He's in there, just like you wanted." The boss didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the warehouse, examining every dark corner with an intensity that made Lena shrink even further. She was sure he could see her, that his piercing gaze could cut right through the rubber and find her. "Any problems?" The boss's voice was smooth, almost polite, but with an undercurrent of steel. "No, sir, smooth sailing," Mickey lied quickly. The boss raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because I heard there was an unscheduled stop at the junkyard." Lena's blood ran cold. They knew, or they suspected. Mickey and Bruno glanced at each other, panic clear on their faces. "It was just a noise, boss. An animal, probably. We checked it out. Everything was fine." The boss gave a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope so. That man is a valuable asset. His financial empire, the investments, the stocks, all of it will soon have a new owner. We can't afford stupid mistakes." He walked toward the office, his footsteps echoing in the tense silence. "Bring the briefcase. Let's get this over with." Mickey scurried back to the car and returned with a black leather briefcase. The three of them entered the office, closing the door behind them. Lena let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She was safe, for now. But the man in the chair was not. The voices were now muffled, coming from inside the room. She couldn't make out the words, only the tone. The boss's calm, cutting voice, the prisoner's short, defiant replies, and the occasional grunts from the other two. Time ticked by, and Lena's anguish grew. She was a helpless spectator, hidden in the shadows, while a man's fate was decided just feet away. Guilt gnawed at her. If she hadn't tried to help, maybe he wouldn't be in this immediate danger. But if she did nothing now, he was surely lost. The office door opened suddenly, and the boss's voice rang out, loud and irritated for the first time. "He's more stubborn than I thought. He won't sign." There was a pause. "Perhaps he needs some incentive. Bruno, persuade him. No marks on the face, please. We need him looking presentable tomorrow." A sickening, muffled impact came from inside the room, followed by a groan of pain. Lena clapped her hands over her mouth to stifle a cry. The violence, even unseen, was terrifying. She had to get out of there. She had to get help. But from who? Her mum, the police. Mickey's words from earlier echoed in her mind. The boss was clear. Whoever this man was, he was powerful. Powerful enough to make bad men obey him. Powerful enough that he might have the police in his pocket. As panic and indecision paralyzed her, a metallic scraping sound caught her attention. It came from inside the office. The sound of something being dragged across the floor, toward the door. Slowly, an object appeared in the gap at the bottom of the door and was pushed out, sliding across the concrete. It was the ring of rusty keys. The man, even after all that, hadn't given up on her. He was giving her a chance, a tool. But on the other side of the door, Bruno was preparing to give him another incentive, and her time to use them was running out with every second. The sight of the keys on the floor was like an electric shock to Lena's system. Hope, fragile and nearly extinguished, rekindled with a fierce strength. That man, even in pain, even facing a terrible threat, still believed in her. He had risked everything to get her that tool. She couldn't let him down. Ignoring the tremor in her hands, she crawled forward, her small body casting barely a shadow. The sound of another dull thud came from the office, followed by a heavy silence. Fear for him was a sharp knife in her chest, but it fueled her actions. She grabbed the keys. The cold, rusty metal, a stark contrast to the smooth, golden key she still held in her other hand. The ring was noisy, jingling with her every move. She had to be quiet. With a delicacy she didn't know she possessed, she got to her feet and moved to the side of the warehouse, away from the office door's line of sight. Her target was the old sedan. If she could get inside, maybe she could find something, anything, to help. A tool, a phone, an ID. The car was unlocked. She opened the passenger door with infinite care, holding her breath at every creak of the hinge. The interior stank of cigarettes and something sour. She slid onto the seat, keeping low. The glove compartment was ajar. She pulled it open. Inside was a tangle of old papers, crumpled maps, and empty snack wrappers. Nothing useful. She looked to the back seats. On the floor, partially hidden under the driver's seat, was a cell phone, an old model, but a phone nonetheless. Her heart leaped. She grabbed it. The screen was cracked, but it lit up when she pushed a button. There was a signal, but who to call? 911. The police. The doubt paralyzed her again. What if the men were right? What if the police were involved? If she made the wrong call, she could make everything worse, delivering her location and the prisoners straight to the enemy. Suddenly, the voices in the office grew louder. "That's enough." "Bruno," said the boss's cold voice. "He's not going to break this way. We have to change strategies. Mickey, call our contact. Tell him we're moving to Plan B." Lena heard the office door open. She shrank down on the car's floor, trying to become invisible. Mickey stepped out, talking on his phone in a low voice. He walked toward the large warehouse door, his back to her. Inside the office, the boss continued, "Arthur, Arthur, you were always the favorite. Always had everything. The inheritance, our father's respect, the control of the business. Did you think I would just let you keep it all? All that capital, all those assets? No, it's my turn now." Arthur, the man's name, and the boss's voice. There was something familiar and poisonous in it, a resentment that went deeper than money. Lena didn't understand the full meaning, but the words inheritance and father painted a dark picture of family betrayal. While Mickey was distracted on the phone and the other two were occupied with their cruel dispute, Lena saw her chance. She needed to create a diversion, something big enough to get Arthur out of that room. Her eyes scanned the warehouse and landed on a large red lever on the far wall, next to a metal box with a lightning bolt symbol. It was the main power breaker for the warehouse. If she could get to it and kill the power, the darkness and confusion might be her only ally. It was a huge risk. She'd have to cross an open space, but it was the only card she had left to play. With the cell phone still in her hand, she silently opened the car door. Crouching low, she began to move, using the shadows of the machinery and crates as cover. Every step was a gamble. Mickey's voice on the phone was a constant murmur, a clock ticking against her. She was halfway to the lever when Bruno's voice echoed from the office. "Boss, he passed out." The boss replied with irritation. "All the better. Makes things easier. When he wakes up, maybe he'll be more cooperative." Lena froze. Passed out. She couldn't count on his help anymore. She was on her own, and Mickey, having finished his call, turned and started walking back in her direction, his gaze sweeping the dim warehouse, straight toward the spot where she was crouched. Mickey's gaze swept the warehouse, and for a terrifying second, it seemed to lock directly onto the dark spot where Lena was huddled. Time stopped. Every beat of her heart echoed like a hammer in her ears. She could see the faint glint of the overhead bulb reflected in his eyes. This was it. He'd seen her. But then his attention was diverted by a noise from the car. The cell phone Lena had left on the passenger seat, forgotten in her haste, buzzed loudly against the vinyl. It was a notification, a tiny sound. But in the tense silence of the warehouse, it sounded like an alarm. Mickey's head snapped toward the sound. "What was that?" he asked, his hand instinctively going to his waistband. From the office, the boss's voice called out, impatient. "What was what, you useless fool? Stop getting spooked by rats and get in here." Mickey hesitated, his gaze torn between the car and his boss's order. The suspicion was still on his face. He took a step toward the vehicle. "I'm sure I heard something." That split second of distraction was all Lena needed. Survival instinct, faster than thought, propelled her forward. She didn't run for the red lever. Instead, she dove deeper into the shadows, moving in an arc, skirting Mickey's line of sight. Her new destination was the large, sliding door of the warehouse. Escape was now her only priority. She had to get out, find help, tell someone what was happening. While Mickey cautiously approached the car to investigate the noise, Lena reached the outer wall. The main door was too heavy, impossible to move alone and silently. But next to it was a smaller service door, probably for foot traffic. It was secured with a rusty padlock. Despair! She looked at the ring of keys in her hand. One by one, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely fit them. She tried the keys in the lock. The first one wouldn't go in. The second one jammed. Sweat beaded on her forehead. She could hear Mickey opening the car door, muttering to himself. The third key, small and almost broken, slid into the lock. Lena turned. There was a loud, sharp, metallic click. The padlock sprang open. With her heart in her mouth, she pulled the door open just enough to create a crack. The cool night air hit her face, carrying with it the sounds of the distant city. She was about to slip through to freedom when the boss's voice came from right behind her. "Interesting. It seems we had a rat after all. A very small one." Lena froze, her hand still on the door. She turned slowly, pure terror draining the color from her face. The boss stood just a few feet away, near the back of the sedan. He wasn't looking at her, but at the floor, where the dust had been disturbed. His eyes followed the trail of small, bare footprints that led from under the car, past the office, around the tire stack, and ended exactly where she stood. He raised his eyes, and the thin, humorless smile returned to his face. "You know, the biggest mistake my brother Arthur ever made was his compassion, always trying to help the helpless, and look where it got him." He took a step toward her. "And it seems that compassion is contagious." At that moment, Arthur, the man in the chair, let out a low groan as he began to regain consciousness. The sound made the boss turn his head for an instant. It was an opening. Lena didn't think, she acted. Instead of bolting through the door, she spun around and ran in the opposite direction, back into the darkness of the warehouse, into the maze of machinery and crates. The boss, caught by surprise at the unexpected move, yelled to the others, "Get her! She can't get out of here!" Bruno and Mickey came running out of the office. Lena dove behind a large lathe covered by a tarp, her body shaking uncontrollably. The door to freedom was open, but now she was more trapped than ever, hunted inside this massive warehouse by 3 furious men. And worst of all, they knew she existed. She was no longer a secret witness. She was living proof. The warehouse, once a haven of shadows, had become a treacherous trap. Lena cowered behind the lathe, the smell of machine oil and dust filling her nostrils. The sound of the men's boots echoed on the concrete, each footstep a hammer blow against her nerves. They split up, their voices cutting through the darkness as they communicated. "Check behind the crates!" the boss shouted, his voice controlled but filled with a cold fury. She couldn't have gotten far. Lena peeked through a slit in the tarp. The single bulb in the center of the warehouse created pools of light and vast patches of black. It was a deadly game of hide and seek, and she was the prey. She knew she couldn't stay put. They would find her eventually. She had to move, to use the darkness to her advantage. On the other side of the warehouse, she heard Bruno knock over a pile of empty cans with a crash that made her jump. The momentary distraction was her chance, slipping out of her hiding place. She ran in a low crouch, moving from one shadow to the next, her small, nimble body navigating the maze of obstacles. Inside the office, Arthur was fighting for consciousness. The pain in his head was a throbbing drum, but the boss's shout, "Get her!" had pulled him from the fog. The girl, the brave little girl from the junkyard, she was still here. She hadn't run. A wave of guilt and dread washed over him, stronger than any physical pain. He had put her in mortal danger. The rope on his wrists felt tighter than ever, but he pulled, ignoring the skin tearing. Her whisper came back to him, "Pull the short end." He had tried before, but now, fueled by adrenaline and the desperate need to protect her, he focused. He twisted his body, contorting his hands behind his back, his fingers searching for the loose end in the knot. Outside, the hunt continued. "I saw her!" Mickey yelled, pointing at a moving shadow near an old forklift. The boss and Bruno converged on the spot, giving Lena the space she needed. She changed direction, darting back toward the area near the office. She didn't know why, she just felt she needed to be close to him. She hid behind a rusty metal shelf, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It was then, in the momentary quiet, that she heard a low sound from the office, a snap, followed by another. Arthur, with a superhuman effort, had managed to loosen the knot. His hands were still bound, but there was now a small amount of slack. He began working on the rope, tying his chest to the chair. Outside, the boss realized they'd been tricked. "She gave us the slip, backs around the office." Lena saw the 3 men turning. They were coming toward her. There was nowhere left to run. She was pinned between the shelf and the smooth wall of the office. Bruno saw her first. "I'm there," he pointed, a cruel grin spreading across his face. He started running toward her. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable. But instead of rough hands grabbing her, she heard a deafening crash. The office door flew open with explosive violence, torn from its hinges. Arthur stood there, free from the chair, though rope still dangled from his wrists. His face was bruised and pale, but his eyes burned with a protective fury. "Stay away from her," he growled, his voice deep and filled with authority. For an instant, The three men froze, stunned by the sudden turn of events. The boss was the first to recover. "You can't stop me, brother. You never could." He turned to Bruno and Mickey. "Don't just stand there. Get them both." The momentary pause was over. Arthur moved, placing himself between Lena and her attackers, an unlikely human shield. He was a businessman, not a fighter, and he was injured and outnumbered. But standing in front of Lena, he looked like a giant. The final confrontation inside that dusty warehouse was about to begin. The standoff lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. Arthur, his body aching and wrists still partially bound, was an imposing figure but visibly vulnerable. Bruno and Mickey, following their boss's order, moved in. Bruno, the larger man, went straight for Arthur, while Mickey, more agile, tried to circle around him to get to Lena. "Run!" Arthur yelled to her, never taking his eyes off the men. But Lena's feet seemed rooted to the floor. Leaving Arthur to face three men alone was unthinkable. She wasn't a fugitive. She was his partner in this fight. Arthur braced for Bruno's attack, but the blow came from an unexpected place. His brother, the boss, whose name Lena now knew was Richard, grabbed a piece of metal pipe leaning against the wall and lunged. Not at Arthur, but toward her. The plan was clear: use the girl as a hostage, as Arthur's ultimate weakness. Seeing the imminent danger to Lena, Arthur reacted instinctively. He shoved Bruno hard, using the man's own weight against him, and threw himself in front of his brother, blocking the path. The metal pipe, meant for the girl, struck Arthur's shoulder with a sickening, dull thud. He grunted in pain, staggering back, but he didn't fall. The pain in his eyes was replaced by a cold resolve. "Richard," Arthur said, his voice tight, "this has gone too far. Leave the child out of it." Richard laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "It went too far the day Dad left the bulk of the inheritance to you. Control of the company, the investment funds, the stock portfolio. He left me the scraps, always treating me like second best." He raised the pipe again. "Now, I'm taking what's rightfully mine." As the two brothers faced off, their family's poisoned history hanging in the air, Mickey saw his chance. He slipped behind a stack of boxes and grabbed Lena's arm. She screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure terror. The sound of her scream broke the spell. Arthur spun around, his face a mask of fury. He moved toward Mickey, but Bruno intercepted him, locking him in a bear hug from behind. Arthur struggled, the strength born of desperation fueling him, but Bruno was stronger. "Hold him," Richard yelled. "He's going to watch while we sign the transfer of his entire precious net worth." Mickey dragged us, struggling, kicking Lena to the center of the warehouse. He forced her to her knees. Richard approached, the black leather briefcase in one hand and a pen in the other. He crouched in front of Arthur, who was immobilized by Bruno. "Sign it, brother," Richard said, his voice soft and menacing. "Sign over all your assets, or your little friend here is going to find out just how hard this concrete floor is." He glanced from Arthur to Lena, a cruel smile on his lips. Arthur stopped struggling. His body went rigid, muscles taut. He looked at Lena, at her wide, tear-filled eyes, and a look of utter defeat washed over his face. He had no choice. The life and safety of this innocent child were worth more than any fortune, more than all the dollars and euros in his accounts. He nodded slowly. "I'll sign." Richard smiled, victorious. He opened the briefcase on the floor and placed the document in front of Arthur. But while Richard was focused on his victory and the other two on restraining Arthur, no one noticed Lena's free hand, the hand that Mickey wasn't holding, the hand that, through all the chaos, still clutched the small golden key with the lion's crest. With a swift, desperate motion, she jabbed the point of the key with all her might into the back of Mickey's hand. Mickey howled in pain and surprise, instinctively letting her go. Lena didn't hesitate. She scrambled to her feet and ran, not for the door, but for the red lever on the wall. It had been her first idea, and now it was her last hope. Lena's run to the opposite wall was a blur of fear and adrenaline. Mickey's cry of pain had bought her a few seconds. But in the vast warehouse, It felt like an impossible distance to cover. "Get her!" Richard bellowed, victory slipping through his fingers. Bruno reluctantly let go of Arthur to chase the girl, but Arthur, now free, didn't let him pass. He threw himself at Bruno's legs, bringing the burly man crashing to the floor with a heavy thud. The two rolled on the concrete in a desperate struggle. Lena reached the wall. The metal box with the red lever was right in front of her. Higher than she'd expected, she stretched, her fingertips scraping the wall, inches from the handle. Mickey, his hand bleeding, reached her and grabbed her ankle. She fell, her chin hitting the floor hard. Pain exploded in her jaw, but the sight of the lever so close kept her focused. She rolled onto her back, kicking out with her other leg, catching Mickey in the face. He staggered back, stunned, giving her the time she needed. With one last effort, she pushed herself up and grabbed the lever with both hands. She pulled with the entire weight of her small body. There was a loud clank, an electrical hum, and then suddenly, the warehouse was plunged into total darkness. The single overhead bulb died, and the low buzz of old machinery went silent. The blackout was absolute, disorienting. A chorus of curses and surprised shouts echoed through the space. Lena, on the floor and already accustomed to the dimness, had an advantage. She could hear the men's ragged breathing, their clumsy movements as they tried to get their bearings. "Lights! Use your phones!" Richard yelled, his voice tense and close. The darkness was her ally. She crawled away from the wall, away from where they had last seen her. A beam of light from a cell phone cut through the black, sweeping the area like a searchlight. The beam passed over her, illuminating the back of Arthur, who was now on his feet, using the confusion to get away from Bruno. "Lena!" Arthur's voice was an urgent whisper in the darkness. "Where are you?" "Here," she whispered back, her voice trembling. "Near the shelves." Another beam of light switched on, Bruno's, followed by Mickey's. 3 beams of light danced chaotically through the warehouse, hunting them. Arthur moved in the shadows, guided by the sound of her voice. "We can't get out the main door," he said. When he found her crouched down, "Richard would have left the SUV blocking it. We have to find another way out." Lena's mind, sharpened by survival, remembered something. When she was under the car, she had seen a small ventilation grate near the floor on the back wall. "The vent," she whispered, pointing in the general direction. "It's small, but maybe I can fit." "Stay right there," Richard yelled. His phone's light pinned them. They were exposed. Richard started walking toward them, the metal pipe dragging ominously on the concrete. Arthur pushed Lena behind him. "Run for the grate. I'll hold them off." "No," she said, grabbing the sleeve of his suit. "Together." Her courage stunned him. In that moment, she was not a frightened child, but a resilient partner. The lights from Bruno and Mickey found them too, trapping them in the crosshairs of 3 beams. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. Richard stopped a few feet away, his face lit from below by his phone, creating monstrous shadows. "It's over, Arthur. There's no escape this time. Give me the girl and sign the papers." Arthur looked at Lena, then at his brother. A strange calm washed over him. He had lost almost everything, but he would not lose his honor by failing to protect this child. It was then that Lena remembered the other object still in her hand, forgotten during the fight. The first cell phone, the one from the car. With a sudden, desperate idea, she repeatedly pressed the side button. The cracked screen flared to life, casting a weak glow. And then a loud, shrill sound filled the warehouse, making everyone flinch. It wasn't a call or an alarm. It was a police siren app, complete with flashing red and blue lights on the cracked screen. In the darkness and confusion, the sound seemed real, loud, and dangerously close. The fake siren ripped through the warehouse darkness, echoing off the metal walls and creating the perfect illusion of squad cars rapidly approaching. For one crucial moment, confusion reigned. Bruno and Mickey froze, their phone-lit faces contorting in panic. Their reaction was instinctual. The cops were coming. "It's a setup!" Mickey shrieked, his voice thin with fear. "Someone tipped them off!" Richard, shrewder, hesitated for only a second, his suspicion warring with the instinct to flee. But the seed of doubt had been planted. His henchmen were already backing away, glancing frantically at the main door, expecting to see the flash of red and blue lights at any moment. "Idiots! It's a trick!" Richard snarled, but his conviction wavered. What if it wasn't? The brother he'd underestimated his entire life might have had a plan. That hesitation was the opening Arthur needed. He grabbed Lena's hand. "Now," he whispered, and they both dove back into the darkness, scrambling toward the back wall where Lena remembered seeing the ventilation grate. The siren continued to blare, a chaotic, piercing sound that masked their footsteps. "Get them! Don't let them escape!" Richard's voice was strained with desperate fury as he realized he was losing control, but his men were more concerned with saving their own skins. Bruno, the first to break, ran for the old sedan. Trying to start it, Mickey bolted for the small service door Lena had come through. Arthur and Lena reached the back wall. Fumbling in the dark, Arthur's hands found the metal grate. It was held in with old, rusty bolts. "It won't budge," he said, frustration in his voice. He pulled with all his might, but the grate barely moved. The cell phone siren began to sputter, the sound choking and fading, revealing the ruse. "It's fake," Richard yelled, realizing the deception. "They're still in here." The sound of his rapid footsteps echoed behind them. There was no more time. Lena, her mind racing, remembered the golden key, still clutched tightly in her other hand. "The key," she said, holding it out to Arthur. "Use the key." Arthur took it, not understanding but trusting her instinct. The key was small but solid. He jammed it into the crack between the grate and the brick wall and used it as a lever. The metal groaned. He put his weight into it, the muscles in his arms straining. One of the rusty bolts gave way with a pop. He leveraged it again. The second bolt snapped. The grate came loose. The hole was small, just as Lena had described, barely big enough for a child. "You first," Arthur said, his voice ragged. "I'll be right behind you." "They're coming," she whispered, hearing Richard's footsteps just yards away. She squeezed through the opening, scraping her arms and back on the rough metal. The cool night air had never felt so sweet. She turned, expecting Arthur to follow, but he was too big. The hole was too narrow for his shoulders. He looked at her through the opening, his face a mixture of relief that she was safe and despair for his own predicament. Richard arrived, the beam of his phone illuminating Arthur trapped in the wall. "Nowhere to run, brother." Arthur looked at Lena, outside, safe in the darkness. "Run, Lena, run, and don't look back. Get help." He braced himself to face his brother and the other two, who were now approaching, realizing the police threat was false. Lena was paralyzed. Flee and leave him behind. After everything they had been through together, her instincts screamed at her to run, to save herself, but her loyal, courageous heart refused to abandon her friend. She looked at the dark, deserted street, then back at Arthur's face, prepared for the worst, and she made a decision that would seal both their fates. Lena's world split into two impossible choices, the safety of flight or loyalty to Arthur. His voice, pleading with her to run, echoed in her ears, but the image of his face, resigned and ready for sacrifice, was stronger. She couldn't go. She couldn't abandon him. Instead of running down the dark street, she took a step back, melting into the deep shadow cast by a nearby dumpster. From her new hiding spot, she could watch the scene unfold through the opening in the wall, a frame for the nightmare. Richard laughed. A victorious, cruel sound. "Always the hero, aren't you, Arthur? Always sacrificing yourself for others. It was that weakness that allowed me to plan all of this. Your blind trust, your altruism. They're liabilities, not assets, in the business world." He drew closer, The metal pipe raised. "Now let's finish our negotiation." Arthur didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the darkness outside, searching for any sign of Lena. He had to believe she had obeyed, that she was safe. That thought was the only thing sustaining him. Bruno and Mickey joined Richard, surrounding Arthur, who was still partially stuck in the wall. The situation was hopeless, but Lena, hidden just feet away, was not idle. The panic had given way to an icy clarity. She couldn't fight them, but she could outsmart them. Her eyes scanned the surrounding area, searching for a weapon, a tool, anything. The alley was filled with trash and debris, and then she saw it. Mounted on the exterior wall of the warehouse, almost invisible in the darkness, was an external electrical control panel, likely connected to the main breaker she had shut off. The cover was broken, and a tangle of colored wires was exposed. A dangerous and incredibly risky idea began to form in her mind. Inside, Richard's patience had run out. "Bruno, get him over here. If he won't sign willingly, we'll find another way to get what we want." Bruno grabbed Arthur's arms and brutally pulled him out of the opening. Arthur stumbled and fell to his knees on the warehouse floor. He was exhausted, injured, and utterly outmatched. Richard placed the document and the pen in front of him. "Last chance, brother. Sign and transfer your entire estate. After that, you and the girl can disappear. I won't even come looking for you." It was an obvious lie. Lena knew it, and so did Arthur. They were witnesses. They would never be set free. Outside, Lena worked frantically. She found a piece of thin, rusted pipe on the ground and used it to poke at the wires inside the control box. She knew nothing about electricity, only what her mother had always warned her. It was dangerous. But the danger to Arthur was greater. She saw a thick red wire and another, a blue one. Instinctively, she used the pipe to force the two wires to touch. Inside the warehouse, Arthur looked at the paper, then at his brother's triumphant face. He was buying time, hoping for a miracle. "You won't get away with this." "Richard, I already have," Richard replied with a smirk. At that exact moment, outside, Lena's metal pipe connected the two wires. There was a blinding flash, a shower of sparks, and a deafening electrical buzz. All the emergency lights in the warehouse, powered by a separate generator, flickered and then blazed to life, flooding the space with a strobing, white light. Simultaneously, the fire alarm system, triggered by the short circuit, went off. A shrill siren, far louder and more real than the one on the phone, began to howl, and the sprinklers in the ceiling burst, showering everyone in torrents of cold water. The confusion was total and absolute. The three men yelled in surprise, shielding their eyes from the flashing lights and the sudden downpour. Richard dropped the pipe and briefcase, trying to protect the documents from the water. In the midst of the chaos, Arthur acted. He surged to his feet and landed a punch on Mickey that sent him sprawling. He then turned on Bruno, who was disoriented by the siren. Arthur shoved him hard into a stack of crates, which collapsed on top of the burly man. Only Richard remained. The two brothers faced each other under the artificial rain, the water soaking their expensive suits, the sirens screaming around them. The game had changed. Richard's advantage had vanished in the light and noise. Arthur glanced toward the opening in the wall, hoping to see Lena, but she wasn't there. A new, sharp fear stabbed at him. What had the short circuit done to her? He had traded her safety for a trap to catch his brother, but at what cost? The deafening siren blared on, an announcement to the whole world that something was terribly wrong in that abandoned warehouse. The fire siren was a scream of liberation. Richard, drenched and furious, looked at his brother, then at his two incapacitated henchmen, and realized the game was over. The noise would draw attention. The police, the fire department. Someone would arrive soon. The greed in his eyes was replaced by the animal panic of being cornered. He took a step back, his gaze darting toward the service door. Escape was his only option. Without a word, he turned and ran. disappearing into the night. Arthur didn't follow. His priority was not revenge, but Lena's safety. He scrambled to the opening in the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs, dreading what he might find. Lena! He found her slumped on the alley floor, a few feet from the electrical box, which was still smoking. She was motionless. A terror he had never before known seized him. He knelt beside her, the sprinkler rain leaking through the opening, mixing with the fine drizzle that had begun to fall from the sky. "Lena, please, talk to me." He touched her shoulder gently. She moaned, her eyes fluttering open. She was dazed, soot smudging her face, but she was conscious. The relief that flooded Arthur was so overwhelming, it nearly brought him to his knees. He helped her sit up, wrapping his soaked suit jacket around her to shield her from the cold. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We saved us," she corrected, with a small, tired smile. The distant, but rapidly approaching sound of real sirens replaced the warehouse alarm. This time, it wasn't a trick. Real help was on its way. Arthur stayed by Lena's side, shielding her, until red and blue lights flooded the alley. The police and paramedics arrived, a wave of order and calm in the chaos. The scene inside the warehouse was clear. Bruno and Mickey were found and detained without a fight, and the transfer documents, though water-damaged, were irrefutable proof of Richard's plan. Arthur told the story to a serious-faced detective, a man who seemed honest and incorruptible. He focused on the facts of the kidnapping and Lena's bravery, knowing the legal battle against his brother's power and influence would be long. But the first, most important victory had been won. They were safe. Lena was checked over by paramedics, who confirmed she was just scared and bruised. As they tended to her, a soft-spoken female officer approached. "Do you know where your mom is, sweetie?" For the first time in hours, Lena thought of her mom. The worry and guilt hit her hard. "She must be so worried. I need to go home." Arthur, overhearing, stepped in. "I'll take her. I need to thank her mother personally." The police agreed, assigning a squad car to escort them. As they drove toward Lena's low-income neighborhood, the silence in the car was filled with a mutual understanding. They had faced hell together and come out the other side, bound by a tie of trust and courage. Lena's house was small and humble, but the light on in the window was the most welcoming beacon in the world. The door flew open before they could knock, and Lena's mother, her face etched with anguish, rushed out, pulling her daughter into a desperate hug. "Where were you? I was so worried." Seeing the elegant, though bruised and soaking wet, man beside her daughter and the police car parked at the curb, confusion and fear took over. What happened? Arthur, with a gentleness and respect the woman rarely received, began to explain. He told her of Lena's courage, of how she had risked everything to save a stranger. He told her of the chase and the terror, and how, in the end, this little girl's cleverness had triumphed over greed and cruelty. Lena's mother listened, tears streaming down her face, a mixture of horror at what her daughter had endured and an immense pride that swelled her chest. She looked at Lena, no longer as a fragile child, but as the hero she was. The reunion was the second victory, the sweetest and most important of all. The family, which was Lena's whole world, was together and safe again. Justice would come. Criminals would be punished. But on that cold, rainy night, the warmth of a mother's hug was the only treasure that mattered. 4 weeks later, the morning sun streamed through the window of a bedroom Lena barely recognized as her own. The once peeling walls were painted a cheerful yellow. There was a new desk with organized books and colored pencils and a crisp school uniform hanging on the closet door. Life had changed so drastically and so quickly, it sometimes felt like a dream. The nightmare in the warehouse had given way to a slow, secure awakening. Richard had fled the country, becoming an international fugitive. His empire built on intimidation began to crumble as other victims, emboldened by Arthur's story, came forward. The federal justice system, free from local influences, began a full-scale investigation. Arthur regained full control of his company, but the experience had profoundly changed him. He no longer saw the world through profit spreadsheets and stock tickers. True wealth, he had learned, wasn't in his assets or his net worth, but in the integrity and courage of a 7-year-old girl who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. His first act as reinstated CEO was to visit Lena and her mother. He didn't offer charity, but opportunity. Lena's mother, a woman of sharp intelligence and an unshakable work ethic, was hired for an administrative position at his company, with a salary that allowed them to rent a safe house in a better neighborhood. For Lena, Arthur established an educational trust fund, a capital investment that would ensure she had access to the best schools, to college and to whatever future she chose. It wasn't a payment, he explained, but an investment in the bravest person he had ever met. That morning, as Lena got ready for her first day at the new school, Arthur knocked on the door. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, but casual slacks and a simple shirt. In his hands, he held a small velvet box. "I have something for you," he said with a kind smile. Lena opened the box. Inside, on a satin cushion, lay the small golden key with the lion's crest, now polished and gleaming, attached to a delicate gold chain. "It was the key to my grandfather's journal," Arthur explained. "He always told me it should only be given to someone who understood the true meaning of courage. I think it's finally found its owner." Lena lifted the necklace. The metal warmed to the touch. She looked up at Arthur, the man she had saved from a trunk, and saw not a billionaire or a CEO, but a friend. Her journey, which had started in the dust and rust of a junkyard, had led her to a place of safety and hope. She no longer scrounged for cans to survive. She now searched for knowledge in books, for friendship in the schoolyard, for a bright future that stretched out before her. The junkyard, that place of broken and forgotten things, had become the unlikely crucible for a friendship that redefined two lives. The poor girl who found a trapped millionaire discovered her greatest treasure was her own compassion. And the man who nearly lost everything learned that true fortune isn't measured in dollars or Bitcoin, but in the acts of kindness that connect us all, proving that even in the darkest of places, one small act of courage can light the brightest of lights.